The Pontiac Fiero is a mid-engine sports car built by Pontiac from 1984 to 1988. The Fiero was designed by George Milidrag and Hulki Aldikacti as a sports car. The Fiero was the first two-seater Pontiac since the 1926 to 1938 coupes, and also the first and only mass-produced mid-engine sports car by a U.S. manufacturer. Many technologies incorporated in the Fiero design, such as plastic body panels, were radical for its time. Other features included hidden headlamps. A total of 370,168 Fieros were produced over the relatively short production run of 5 years. By comparison, 163,000 Toyota MR2s were sold in its first 5 years. At the time, its reputation suffered from criticisms over performance, reliability and safety issues. The word Fiero means proud in Italian, and wild, fierce, or ferocious in Spanish. Alternative names considered for the car were Sprint, P3000, Pegasus, Fiamma, Sunfire, and Firebird XP. The Fiero 2M4 was on Car and Driver magazine's 10 Best list for 1984. The 1984 Fiero was the official pace car of the Indianapolis 500 for 1984, beating out the new 1984 Chevrolet Corvette for the honor. History: the Fiero was conceived as a small, two-seat sports car with all-new suspension and V6 engine. While General Motors management and accountants were opposed to investing in a second two-seater sports car that might compete with the Corvette, they perceived the oil crisis as a market opportunity for a fuel-efficient sporty commuter car. To this end, the Fiero was redesigned to use a fuel-efficient version of GM's 2.5L four-cylinder Iron Duke engine capable of 27 mpg US in the city and 40 mpg US on the highway with the economy ratio transmission option. These figures are U.S. Environmental Protection Agency test circuit results, published by Pontiac, and confirmed from multiple sources. It was impressive mileage for a 2.5L engine of the period, and still good by today's standards, but the 3-speed automatic reduced highway mileage to only 32 mpg US. With respect to fuel economy, the Fiero was intended to appeal to a market niche for which the Corvette with its V8 engine was unsuitable. A mid-engine layout was originally chosen as a way to reduce both aerodynamic drag and vehicle weight to improve fuel efficiency, and also for its handling, traction, and braking benefits. However, the sports car potential of the mid-engine layout was not realized when the Fiero debuted. As a cost-saving measure commonly employed at GM, the tires, brakes, and suspension components were carried over from other GM economy cars. As a result, the handling and cornering abilities of the initial Fiero were merely on par with other contemporary sporty coupes. Additionally, the Iron Duke i4 motor, which was designed for optimal running at lower PM due to its long stroke, was unsuited to drivers who purchased the Fiero expecting a quick, high-revving motor more in keeping with the design of the car. As drivers attempted to frequently run the engine at greater RPM than it was designed for, the engines experienced a number of reliability problems and breakdowns were frequent. The public had high expectations for the Fiero with its mid-engine layout and aggressive styling, which resembled exotic mid-engine sports cars like the Ferrari 308 GTB. While initially garnering good reviews for its handling, the Fiero soon received negative reviews from other automotive critics who expected higher performance from a mid-engine two-seater. Despite the critical press, the Fiero sold well, and although Pontiac operated 3 shifts at the factory during 1984, they could not keep up with initial demand. The sharing of suspension and other components with other GM cars meant the rear suspension and powertrain was virtually identical to that of the Citation and Pontiac Phoenix. The Fiero even included rear tie rod ends attached to a steering knuckle, although these were hard-mounted to the engine cradle and only used for maintaining the rear tire alignment. The front suspension was derived from the Chevette, and Chevette enthusiasts found that they could upgrade their undersized front brakes and rotors using Fiero parts. By 1985, the oil crisis was long past and demand developed for a Fiero having more engine power and better sports car performance. Pontiac responded by introducing the GT model, which included upgraded suspension tuning, wider tires, and a V6 engine having 43 horsepower more than the base four-cylinder. Finally, in 1988, numerous changes were made to the Fiero to bring it in line with its original design. The most significant was a completely redesigned suspension to realize the potential of the mid-engine layout. The unique suspension included new two-piece brake calipers and upgraded brake rotors. These had been part of Fiero's initial design, but cost-cutting kept them from being implemented sooner. The available I4 and V6 engines benefited from evolutionary improvements, but the planned availability of turbochargers and newer DOHC engines did not happen before production stopped. In spite of the much improved car which finally had realized its potential after years of mismanagement, GM ended production after the 1988 model year due to declining sales figures. Bad press and consumer sentiment frequently cited heavy media coverage of Fiero engine fires, as well as the poor reliability and performance of the 1984 to 1987 models. Designing the Fiero turned out to be an unusual design for GM, which stood out from the rest of their product lines. The company had rejected development of a sporty, two-seater Pontiac since the late 1960s, as they believed it would steal sales from the Corvette. However, young Pontiac engineers in 1978 were able to sell the Fiero concept to the corporation as a fuel-efficient four-cylinder commuter car that just happened to have two seats, rather than a muscle car. When the engineers brought back a running prototype in less than 6 months, corporate bought it. However, the budget for the car, from design to building the machines for making the parts, was $400 million, just a fraction of what GM generally spent on bringing a typical prototype car into production. Pontiac assigned oversight of the Fiero to Hulki Aldikacti, a Turkish copyright migrant copyright with a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan and nearly 22 years of experience under his belt. Aldikacti Euro unregistered trademark S initial challenge was with GM's corporate structure, which split its engineers into two categories: the car engineers who would create blueprints for the car, and manufacturing engineers who would work out the fabrication and assembly issues. Fiero blueprints traveled back and forth between the two engineering branches, wasting time and money. Aldikacti was forced to sit the two teams of engineers down next to one another, allowing for no excuse as to why there was a Euro and no build a Euro after his design was done. Many modifications in the Fiero Euro unregistered trademark S production needed to be made. For instance, despite his long-standing interest in manufacturing body panels from plastic, Aldikacti consented to metal body pieces, the dies for which were much less costly. As the prototypes took shape, the exterior lines resembled more of a Ferrari or Porsche than a typical GM car, but the tight budget was taking its toll on the design, particularly on Aldikacti's dream of a high-performance, aluminum block V6. The cost of developing a new engine would be more than the production of the whole car itself. Instead, Aldikacti was forced to settle for the already manufactured four-cylinder engine GM produced for the Pontiac, the A Euro OE Iron Duke, a Euro nicknamed for its heavy iron block. This engine was too blocky to fit into the tiny car, so it was equipped with a smaller oil pan, causing the engine to always run a quart low. Aldikacti Euro unregistered trademark S unorthodox design methods and personal manner made him unpopular to most of GMA Euro unregistered trademark S bureaucracy. 3 times he was told by counterparts at other GM divisions that his car had been killed by the corporate bin counters. In fact, however, the Fiero project was kept alive at the wishes of certain high-ranked defenders, chief among them William Haglund, who took over Pontiac in 1980. Haglund took the reins as the division was suffering from the loss of their hot rods in the late 1970s. Pontiac Euro unregistered trademark S cars were said to be bland, outdated, and what customers of the past would buy. In 1983, Haglund told his top 36 staffers that Pontiac would rebuild itself with cars that were a Euro OE, citing a Euro and a Euro O, a different a Euro. These terms only described one of Pontiac Euro unregistered trademark S cars in their current lineup, Aldikacti Euro unregistered trademark S commuter car. In order to build the 100,000 cars a year Haglund Euro unregistered trademark S marketing team committed to sell Hoagland negotiated a deal to reopen a plant once shut down in the heart of Pontiac, Michigan. He and his staff wanted to prove that cooperation between management and labor could be solved without the use of robots on the assembly line, which GMA unregistered trademark S-top executives wanted to use. Hoagland allowed hourly workers to name Aldikacti's car. Fiero was their choice. Production years. 1984 The Fiero began production in August 1983. In an effort to sell the car as economically sensible, GM equipped and sold the Fiero as a commuter car. Although the marketing build-up leading to initial release indicated anything but a regular commuter. The car also proved uncomfortable for some drivers because of the lack of power steering. Fiero marketing included title sponsorship of Daryl Hall and John Oates tour supporting the release of their Big Bam Boom album. From November 1984 through 1985, each tour venue had Fiero banners and signage above the main stage, new Fieros on display, and Pontiac dealer ticket giveaways. Concurrent with the development of the production car was the development by Huffaker Engineering of a Fiero to compete in IMSA's GTU Road Racing Series. Clay Young was the team's primary driver, with occasional guest appearances by John Oates. The 1984 model line included a limited Indy Pace Car edition, consisting of an Indianapolis 500-themed option package on SE model vehicles. Approximately 2,000 of these vehicles were sold. The Indy had aero body cladding and new front and rear fascias that would be used on the 1985 GT. Only the underpowered four-cylinder engine was available, though a few prototypes could be seen driving around the greater Detroit area with a unique periscope-style inlet sprouting from the engine compartment and curving up and over the roof. This periscope-style inlet was used on the actual Indy Pace car Fieros that appeared at the 1984 Indianapolis 500. This inlet scoop, and the 2.5L Super Duty engine that they fed, were not available on the production model Pace car replicas. Hoagland named Pontiac engineer John Callis to drive the actual Pace car at Indy. Callis was the factory's lead engineer on both the Pace car and IMSA programs. Fiero became the first four-cylinder car to pace the 500 since a Stoddard Dayton paced the 1914 race. 1985 1985 saw the introduction of the GT model, which looked just like the 1984 Indy model without the decals or body color wheels. The problem with insufficient power was addressed, much to the satisfaction of the general public. A Chevrolet 2.8L V6 engine rated at 140 horsepower and 170 lb-ft was put into the car, satisfying most critics of the base engine. The high-output V6 was paired with a modified Muncie 4-speed transmission. The four-cylinder engine was now paired with the Japanese-designed Isuzu 5-speed transmission. 1986 1986 was the first year the fastback roofline was offered. Though originally conceived by Pontiac insiders as a new model, possibly called the GTP, or GTU, it has been said that GM management at the time felt that using GTP, or GTU suggested a racing car and thus an image they did not want to promote. Individuals present at the unveiling of the new fastback roof style designed by Pontiac at a Graham test track actually thought it was a new Corvette at first. But this new body style simply became the GT model for 1986 while the old 1985 GT body style became the SE model. Also offered late in the production year was a 5-speed Muncie Milidrag transmission. Models equipped with a 4-cylinder engine remained largely unchanged. The clutch hydraulic systems were redesigned with new master and slave cylinders. 1987 1987 saw changes to the front and rear fascias on the base coupe with the SE and GT models keeping the same aero nose. The new non-aero noses lost the black bumper pads of the earlier models and had a smoother look. The four-cylinder engine's power rating increased to 98 horsepower with some major modifications which included a roller cam, redesigned intake manifold, distributorless ignition system, open combustion chamber cylinder head and upgraded throttle body fuel injection system. This was the last year for the spin-on oil filter on the four-cylinder. The car was offered in bright metallic blue, and replacing the ribbed black molding was the round style found on the GT models. As a side note, the SE models retained the ribbed molding, and added the aero nose found on the GT. Redesigned headlight motors appeared in 1987. Additionally, starting with the 1987 model, Pontiac dealerships offered an upgrade in the form of an option that changed the original body to a Pininfarina Ferrari 308 type body, called the Fiero mirror. Corporate concepts completed the mirror transformation, and none were sold as kit form. The mirror body change was offered only on new Fieros, sold through Pontiac dealers, and is considered a class of car in its own right. Only 247 mirrors were produced by corporate concepts before production was halted when sued by Ferrari. With its limited number produced, the Pontiac mirror is one of the rarest American-made automobiles. 1988 The 1988 Fiero brought a new suspension design, thought by many to have a striking resemblance to those designed by Lotus, which at the time, was about to be acquired by General Motors. The suspension was never a Lotus design though. It was the suspension the Pontiac engineers had designed in the beginning, along with what they learned from the racing program. Up front were revised control arms and knuckles that reduced steering effort and improved the scrub radius. In the back, the old Citation parts were replaced with a real tri-link suspension with all new knuckles. This new suspension came with staggered wheel sizes on WS6 suspension-equipped models, with 15" and wide wheels up front and 15" and wide wheels in the rear for improved handling balance and to offset the slightly increased front track that resulted from the improvements. Topping off the package were the new vented disc brakes at all four corners, which addressed braking complaints of road testers. A variable effort electro-hydraulic power steering unit, the same design later found on the GM EV1, was also to be a late addition. This option never made it to production. A Euro 1 reason cited is that models with a prototype power steering were noted as being too loud. The four-cylinder engine received an in-pan oil filter element and balance shaft. A formula option was added, which offered many of the GT features with the standard coupe body, including the 120 mph speedometer, WS6 suspension and the rear spoiler. 1988 marked the end of production for the Fiero, and is also considered to be the best Fiero produced. Improvements to suspension, brakes, steering, and improvements to both the four-cylinder and V6 engines took the car to a level far beyond the 1984 model that had received much criticism. 1988 was also the only year a yellow exterior color was available as a factory option. During the Fiero's final model year, the last window sticker was placed on the last Fiero to roll off the Pontiac, Michigan plant line. The 1988 Fiero was the most desired by automotive collectors because of the improvements made to the 1988 model year, and this being the last year of production. The 1988 mirror seen as the most sought-after model and tops the Fiero list in resale value. This model is commonly used to create kit cars. 1990 A prototype of the never-produced 1990 Fiero was displayed at the 20th anniversary show in July 2003, at Fiorama 2005, at the Michigan show in 2006 and most recently at the 25th anniversary show in Pontiac, Michigan in 2008. Continued showing of the prototype may no longer be an option in the near future, as GM has taken to cutting funding to relieve the pressure of its financial woes. GM Heritage Center continues storing the 1989/1990 Fiero. Many of the 89/90 coupe prototypes have been demolished in a scrapyard in Australia. Much of its design influence is apparent in the fourth-generation Firebird. New engines were proposed for the 1990 model year, from the then-new DOHC 190 bhp quad-4 four-cylinder as a base engine to replace the 2.5 Iron Duke to a new 200-plus HP DOHC V6 for the GT models. Even a 231 CID Buick Turbo V6-powered Fiero is rumored to have been seen at a test track. The single 1990 Fiero GT prototype had an early version of the upcoming DOHC V6 that would be put into production in the Grand Prix and Lumina Z34 in the early 1990s. This engine developed more than 200 horsepower. GM cited slumping and unprofitable sales of the Fiero as the reason for its demise following its fifth model year. Technical features. Suspension design 84-87 front suspension is a wider direct derivative of the Chevrolet Chevette and Pontiac T1000. It employs a double A-arm design common prior to the advent of struts, and has naturally good geometry. A drawback of this design, however, means that the car's front suspension has 4 ball joints. Nevertheless, the tie rods allow toe-and-out adjustability. Minimal camber adjustments exist on 1984 to 1987 models without an aftermarket upgrade that replaces the upper ball joints with slotted mounting points units. The joints have typical grease fittings for regular lubrication commonly found on pre-2000 autos. The rear suspension is essentially a Gram X car's front suspension moved to the rear of the Fiero. The uppers are top plates and Chapman struts, while the lowers are attached with ball joints. In lieu of the steering rack which would have been installed in an X car, tie rod ends are attached to the engine cradle and used to align the rear wheels. The four-wheel independent suspension provides uncharacteristically accurate handling for a vehicle of its size and price range. However, due to the use of multiple suspension pivot and attachment points, maintaining the suspension is more costly than some less technical suspension systems. With the 1988 model year came a completely new front and rear suspension with vented disc brakes at all 4 corners, what Pontiac's engineers had planned for the car to have from the beginning. The front suspension geometry was changed to decrease the scrub radius, thus decreasing steering effort without adding a bulky power steering system. The camber curve was also much improved, the dampers are moved inside the coil springs, and new sealed bearing hub units were used in 1988. The rear suspension featured multi-link Chapman strut suspension, and the tie rod-related bump steer experienced with the earlier suspension design was fixed. The brakes were also upgraded to 10.5 invented rotors on the front and rear with an improved slide caliper design having larger diameter slides. The Fiero Formula and Fiero GT models also received a rear anti-sway bar to complement non-progressive rate springs. The 1984 Euro 1987 frames will accept a 1988 rear cradle. However, the struts must be replaced with a narrower diameter Carrera coilover unit with a steel tube extension and offset mounting plates added to replace the Chapman strut unit, thus yielding a larger, 1984 Euro 1987 engine compartment with the ride quality benefits of the 1988 suspension. In the August 1985 issue of Road and Track, the Fiero was tested against 6 other sports cars. The slalom results: Honda Civic CRXC, 62.5 Toyota MR2, 61.6 Pontiac Fiero, 61.5 Alfa Romeo Graduate, 58.4 Baton X1/9, 58.3 Mazda RX-7 GSL, 57.2. Transmissions Automatics. All automatic equipped Fieros were equipped with the 3-speed TH125 with torque converter lockup. Automatic transmission final drive ratios. 1984 Euro 1986, 3.18, 1987 Euro 1988, 3.33. TH125 gear ratios: first gear, 2.84, second gear, 1.60, third gear, 1.00, reverse, 2.067. 4-speed manual. All 4-speed manual transmissions were built at the Muncie, Indiana Allison plant. The 1984 production line saw 2 transmissions, a performance 4-speed with a final drive ratio of 4.10, and an economy 4-speed with a final drive ratio of 3.32. The V6 on the 1985 model and part of the 1986 production year came with a 4-speed with a final drive ratio of 3.65. The lower-geared 4.10 4-speed transmission showed improved acceleration, but sacrificed fuel economy. 5-speed manual. Isuzu and Muncie 5-speed transmissions were available, depending on model and equipment, beginning in 1985 for the Isuzu 5-speed, which came on 4-cylinder cars, and in 1986 for the Muncie 5-speed, which came on V6-equipped cars. The Milidrag 282 5-speed is sometimes referred to as the Muncie 282 or the Muncie Milidrag 282, as the design was licensed to General Motors for manufacture by Muncie. This Muncie transmission is the stronger unit, designed for use with the higher output of the V6. Manual transmission gear ratios crash safety. The Pontiac Fiero, being popularly known as being made entirely of fiberglass, is wrongly accused of being unsafe in a collision. The Fiero, with its unique plastic body-on-space frame design, helped the Fiero achieve an HTSA-NCAP frontal crash test rating of 5 stars, the highest rating available. According to Hemmings Motor News, the exceedingly sturdy, 600-pound space frame consisted of roughly 280 separate galvanized and high-strength steel stampings joined by 3,800 welds and, when assembled with the Fiero's mechanicals, was fully drivable without its skin. The Fiero's body panels are purely cosmetic and carry no structural load. The Fiero was the second safest vehicle sold in America from 1984 to 1988, bested by the Volvo 740 deciliter station wagon. The official crash test scores were as follows: head injury criterion, 356.5/308.6, chest deceleration 30.9/29.9, femur load left 840/800 right 800/740. The Fiero's technologically advanced spaceframe technology went on to be incorporated in the Saturn S series, Pontiac Transport and Chevrolet Lumina APV Carlins. Problems and issues. Engine fire reputation. Of the total production of the Pontiac Fiero of 370,168, 135 of them were reported to have had engine fires. 122 of these occurred while driving, according to the NHTSA. The engine fires almost exclusively pertain to the 1984 model year. Later model years were produced with upgraded equipment, and frequency of engine fire was significantly reduced. According to Auto Week's publication of Fiero Firing Squad, on October 6, 1983, a Pontiac engineer wrote an urgent memo to report that 2 Fieros had suddenly caught fire during test drives. This was only 3 months after the production of the Fiero began at the Pontiac plant. It was thought to be caused by antifreeze leaking out of badly installed hoses, but in reality it was defective connecting rods. After one meeting with the Saginaw foundry manager, he wrote that Euro 60% to 90% of the rods produced do not exhibit defects. This means at least every 1 out of 10 rods produced were defective, and possibly 4 out of 10 were also defective. The Associated Press quoted the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as saying it had received 148 complaints regarding Pontiac Fieros catching fire, including reports of 6 injuries. Low levels of engine oil may cause a connecting rod to break, allowing oil to escape and come into contact with engine parts. The oil would catch fire when it contacted the exhaust manifold or hot exhaust components. David Hudgens, a Graham spokesman in Detroit, said, "If you ran out of oil, and then that coupled with some aggressive driving, perhaps, and maybe not changing the oil very often, you end up with a broken rod, and that's where the connecting rod came in. It is still the owner's responsibility to check the oil." The Pontiac division claimed in a 1988 press release that GM tests have shown that running these 1984 cars with low engine oil level can cause connecting rod failure, which may lead to an engine compartment fire. Pontiac is aware of 260 fires attributable to the condition, along with 10 reported minor injuries. The larger of the 2 reported numbers of cars with fires amounts to 0.07% of Fiero models produced. The fires affected the 2.5L engine almost exclusively, and mostly 1984 models. There are several possible contributors to Fiero engines catching fire. The primary cause is thought to be a batch of poorly cast connecting rods, produced in GM's Saginaw plant, which failed when the oil level became too low. One theory is that the sports car styling attracted buyers who would drive the car hard, most notably by excessively revving the engine. Another factor was the incorrectly listed 3-quart oil capacity. The actual oil capacity is 4.5 quarts, but a misprint on the dipstick and in the owner's manual resulted in owners using only 3 quarts. Any leakage or consumption would allow the oil level to decline over time to a dangerously low level. If the proper oil level was not maintained, the bearings could seize, snapping the porous castings of the connecting rods. This could result in a hole being punched in the engine block, allowing oil to spray onto hot exhaust components where it could ignite. Alternatively, some fires may have been because of the engine wiring harness bulkhead connector being located in the center of the engine bay above the exhaust manifold, where heat could possibly melt and ignite the wiring. The 1984 model had a magnesium grille over this area. In later models, the main engine harness connector was moved to the battery area, and was improved to some degree with better heat shielding wrapped around the wiring harness. A third cause might be cracks in the engine block from over-tightening the head bolts. Some engines developed cracks in the block that would leak coolant and/or oil, sometimes accompanied by broken head bolts directly above the crack. The leak would spray coolant or oil, the latter resulting in fire if sprayed onto the hot catalytic converter or exhaust manifold at the front of the engine compartment. Most vehicles existing today have been serviced by GM during one of the safety recalls on the car. For the fire-related recall, shields and drip trays were added to prevent leaking fluids from contacting hot surfaces. The presence of drip shields between the engine block and the exhaust manifold are a clue that the car has been retrofitted. The addition of the longer AC Delco PF51 oil filter and a recalibrated dipstick added extra oil capacity to the oiling system, and enabled running 4 quarts of oil in the crankcase instead of 3, to help prevent oil starvation to the rods. Certain vehicles also had their connecting rods or entire block replaced. Any fires that happen today would most likely not be caused by the aforementioned causes, but instead due to faulty repairs and failure of engine components, wiring, etc. due to age. Cooling system issues with a normal operating temperature of 220°F Fahrenheit prior to the recall switching to a 195°F Fahrenheit thermostat, the mid-mounted engine utilized long pipes to carry coolant to the front-mounted radiator. This demanded that a special coolant filling procedure be followed to prevent air pockets, as with many modern cars. Simply pouring coolant into the thermostat housing might leave an air bubble in the radiator, while adding coolant just to the radiator might leave an air bubble in the engine's coolant passages. Proper procedure must be followed in order to ensure an air-free cooling system. Another problem has become common since more Fieros are being serviced by auto repair shops which do not know their design very well. The underbody coolant tubes are positioned in a manner in which not even a casual glance underneath the car would suggest their vulnerability. As a result, many of them have been crushed by shoplifts, resulting in a near-complete lack of engine cooling. The age of the car suggests that even General Motors dealerships may now be unaware of the proper jacking methods. However, the cooling system of the Fiero, properly maintained and in good working order, is more than adequate for even the most demanding environmental conditions. Today, currently the Fiero has a cult following of owners and customizers. While all Fiero models are considered to be collectible, the 1988 model year is especially sought after by collectors due to its limited production numbers and vastly improved underpinnings. Because of an abundance of replacement parts available from other General Motors vehicles, there are many upgrades that can be done to improve performance and reliability of the cars. Additionally, a multitude of different General Motors engines have been installed by enthusiasts, from the Quad 4 engine to the Chevrolet small block V8 to the Cadillac 4.9L and Northstar V8S. The GM 3800 Supercharged is also a very popular choice, as well as the 3.4L found in the 1993, 1994, or 1995 Camaro Firebird. One shop in particular that pioneered and now specializes in V8 installations has even gone so far as to install the famed Z06 Corvette power plant, the 505 horsepower LS7, into a Fiero. Installation of the 4.9L V8 or smaller engines is possible with few modifications to the car itself, because Fiero prototypes were tested with a similar small aluminum V8 prior to production. As a result, the engine bay is large enough to accommodate engines of that size. A large following of owners still exists with many web pages, groups, and clubs devoted to the car, and the basic chassis is commonly used as a kit car platform from wild custom rebodies to Ferrari Testarossa and Ferrari F355 replicas. Legacy When the Fiero, a Euro unregistered trademark S 1984 model was introduced, it played a major role in building the Euro Excitamento Euro image that the Pontiac Division Motor Company wanted to establish in its car buyers. This car pioneered new concepts such as the participation of auto workers in production methods as well as new materials provider showcases the first production car in the world to use a space frame chassis with a separate body shell composed of SMC sheet-molded composite. According to Design News, Pontiac engineers pointed out that the Fiero experience helped the company to develop the sporty look of the Grand Am and Sunbird, as well as a Euro road car. Euro features in the once traditional Bonneville and Grand Prix. Such Fiero advances as the composite skin lived on in new GM products like the Saturn. Scale models Fiero models and die-cast replicas have come and gone over the years. Hot Wheels released a 1984 Fiero 2M4 under many paint schemes. These Hot Wheels cars are now very rare. Matchbox and Majorette also released Fiero models during the car's heyday. Monogram has released and re-released a 1985 Fiero GT model. In recent years, a large 118 die-cast model of a 1985 GT has been released in red and silver. In 2007 the Motor-Max Toy Company began releasing small die-cast Fiero GT toys under the American Graffiti and Fresh Cherries lines. Select Walmart locations sold a special since '68 Fiero made by Hot Wheels, which uses the original 1984 mold with a new paint job. The Kenner toy line MASK had a black Fiero GT that converted into a glider craft and three-wheel chopper, called Fiery Force. Tonka's toy line Gobots included a character, Sparky, who converted into a 1984 Fiero 2M4. Also worth mention is the Transformers character Punch Counterpunch, a spy who converts into a vehicle looking similar to a 1985 Fiero GT, but modified to avoid trademark issues. Other plastic kit display models were released by MPC or TL in 1/25 scale. One was a 1984 2M4 kit 10883, the other was 1987 GT kit 6401. Decal set 230 for the Fiero Indy Pace car was also released by an unknown manufacturer. No manufacturer information on the instructions or decal sheet. References. http www.autobrew Pontiac Fiero Indy 500 Pace Car 7 JPG. External links, Fiero at DMOZ.